I had a client who I was sitting down with just a couple weeks ago, and they had put into their will that they wanted to leave 10% to charity. And I think that's phenomenal. And then I told them, I was like, there's a better way to do this. And they're like, what are you talking about?
Welcome to the Semmax Way, the definitive podcast for mastering finance, investment, and retirement planning.
All right. Well, welcome. My name is Matt Landon. I'm the CEO of Semmax Financial Group. I'm joined by Phil Bastron. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
That's right.
Okay.
Thanks.
Awesome. Awesome. You are the Senior Philanthropic Advisor with the Winston-Salem Foundation.
That's right. Yeah, okay. I've been in this role for about a year.
All right. So you want to tell me, what is the Winston-Salem Foundation? What do you guys do?
Yeah. So the Winston-Salem Foundation is a community foundation. It's a public nonprofit organization. Community foundations exist all across the country. There's about 800 or so community foundations, again, across the United States that vary largely both in size and sort of reach. Mm-hmm. So the Winston-Salem Foundation, we've been around for over 100 years. We were established in 1919. So we're the oldest foundation of any type in the state of North Carolina. That's all. And among those 800 community foundations, we're consistently among the top 50 largest in the country. There's literally sort of categories of sizes of community foundations, and we're in the large category of community foundation. So the Winston-Salem Foundation has about $650 million of assets under its management. We have about 1,600 charitable funds that we house here at the foundation. And in 2024, we had over 1,400 donors to various funds here at the foundation. But essentially what a community foundation does is take charitable dollars from people in the community, bring them into the community foundation, then we provide funding to organizations, charitable organizations request funding.
That's really cool because, Semmax, we're a financial advisory firm. Yeah. We work with a lot of clients, a lot of pre-retirees, and then also a lot of retirees. And what happens is oftentimes people will say, because I've had this come up in multiple situations where people don't have kids and they say, I want to give funds to charity. Yep. And they kind of go, all right, I go, great. Well, what are you passionate about? Where do you want to give it? And they go, I don't know. Yep. Or they start having reasons why, well, I don't like this organization for this reason, or I don't like that one. And it's like, I want to have an impact. I want to affect our community. And, we're a small firm. We're located in Winston. We have an office in Greensboro, but we're very focused on the triad and our community. And I love kind of talking with you and partnering and helping our clients understand a little bit more of what an impact they can do in their hometown, whether it's Winston-Salem, whether it is Greensboro, but this area having a direct impact. I know you said before we started recording this, I know we were talking a little bit, and you said you really had an impact kind of in the Forsyth County area. What are some different things that you do that you kind of get excited about?
Yeah. So, if a donor comes to us, just like what you're talking about, Matt, maybe a little unsure, they want to make an impact, but they're a little bit unsure about how they want to proceed with that. I think the community foundation is a great avenue for those types of folks. I often like to say, when you come to the community foundation, it can kind of be like a choose your own adventure. Like if you come to us and you say, I'm really passionate about supporting my church or my alma mater or this organization, we've got the ability to set up a fund or set up a donor advised fund and just sort of let you take that and be really independent in your grant making and do those types of things. But if like you were suggesting, maybe I want to make an impact in my community, but I don't exactly know where to start, community foundations are a great resource for those types of folks because we really have a finger on the pulse of this community and organizations, nonprofit organizations that are making an impact in the community. And we can help introduce you to some of those organizations, talk about different areas of need in the community and how those needs have changed over time. And again, we've been around for over 100 years. And so we've seen those evolving needs in the community, and our staff is really tuned into those types of things. So when somebody would come to us, we would have a very, very similar conversation, Matt, to what you were just saying. Tell me a little bit about your charitable giving history, kind of where you are in that path, and tell me about some of the organizations that really matter to you. And then we can then steer the conversation to the various types of funds that are maybe available that would suit that person's need. And that applies both to giving now during their lifetime, as well as planning for their estate.
And that's something that I think is really key and really, it's really an interesting conversation is, I had a client who I was sitting down with just a couple of weeks ago, and they had put into their will that they wanted to leave 10% to charity. And I think that's phenomenal. And then I told them, I was like, there's a better way to do this. And they're like, what are you talking about? Well, because it was through the will, that was going to be coming from non-qualified funds, which obviously get a step up in cost basis. Well, they also had significant IRA assets. And so by readjusting beneficiaries, it was like, leave those non-qualified kind of step up in basis, leave that to your family. Let's take those taxable dollars, give that to charity. Yeah. I was like, you can actually leave more to charity. You can leave more to the church. You can leave more to the community, and your family walks away with more money in their pocket. Yeah. And those are the kinds of conversations that I think are really key, especially because if I looked at you and I said, would you like an extra 15%? Well, we were only going to give you 400,000, but let's bump that up. I don't see where there's a downside there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think in planning for your estate plan and folks' estate planning conversations, your assets can basically go three places. They can go to your heirs, they can go to charity, or they can go to the government. And so most people want to find a way to maybe eliminate that third category. And so reduce, not eliminate, but reduce that. And charity is a really good way to do that. And again, at the Community Foundation, at the Winston-Salem Foundation here, we can make that all really kind of easy, customizable to whatever that donor wants to do. So, many of your clients are obviously working with you. They've probably got an estate planning attorney. So they've got a team of professional advisors. The Winston-Salem Foundation can kind of come in and fill that role of, we know what you're doing, how you're growing your assets, how you're establishing your will and trust. The charitable portion of that, we can sort of be that advisor for what you want to do.
No, I was sitting down actually yesterday with someone, and they had started their own foundation about 15 years prior. And it's a phenomenal organization. They really like what they're doing, but they're getting older. They don't really have someone to step into those shoes. And I know that y'all will also work with folks that maybe have set up their own private foundations and say, okay, how can we continue this legacy if you don't have someone directly to take care of it? Your board is kind of aging. Maybe that next generation isn't stepping up in that same way. Have you had anything like that step up, or how does that work?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think we've been seeing a little bit more of that recently. Okay. Setting up your own foundation, family foundation, there's a lot of benefits to that. Gives a lot of control. There's a lot of sort of legacy planning that you can do within that private foundation, but it comes with a lot of duties as well, that just managing that organization. Really, the foundation can sort of take a lot of that type of thing off your plate. So, for instance, we had a family that came to us recently. They had set up their own charitable trust that their intent was to provide scholarships to students through this charitable trust that they had set up. Well, when it came time to actually start administering a scholarship program, accepting applications, marketing this program, having a review board that reviews the scholarship applications, working with the universities to award the scholarships, they realized, this is actually a lot more maybe than we bargained for. And so they came to the Winston-Salem Foundation. We've been working with them to set up an endowed scholarship fund here at the foundation that will have the same criteria of what they had hoped to accomplish with their own foundation, but we can sort of help administer the programs.
So there's ways where you can kind of say, okay, I want to transfer this over. Yeah. You guys can take it on, but I know you mentioned something very early on about control, kind of that ability to kind of control those assets. So are they able to allocate and say, we want this to specifically go in this area? I know before this started, I don't think I can go a day without talking about running, because I'm a big runner. We were talking about running earlier. And I know it's like, if you have something where you say, okay, I want this to specifically sponsor something with either physical fitness or education, I want this to go to a kinesiology program. Is there something where you could say, okay, I still want this foundation to continue on its mission, even though it's kind of coming under the umbrella of the Winston-Salem Foundation?
Yes, exactly. So earlier we were talking about, when a donor comes to us, we can sort of start talking about the different types of funds. So maybe I'll just sort of give a brief overview of what those different types of funds are and sort of the different level of control. So starting with, I guess, a donor could come to the Winston-Salem Foundation, set up an endowed named fund that is a unrestricted fund for the community. So basically what that's saying is, hey, Winston-Salem Foundation, we trust you to understand the needs of the community. We know organizations are coming to you for support. Here's a fund for you to make those grant decisions as you see fit and your staff sees fit. And so that's an unrestricted fund. We set that up, and that allows our team to have grant making dollars to respond to those needs of organizations for the community. Kind of the next step from that would be what we call a field of interest fund.
Okay.
So maybe a donor comes and says, hey, I want to set up a fund here at the foundation, and I really care about the environment. I don't exactly have a specific organization in mind that I want to support, but I know that I want to make an impact on the environment.
Okay.
So they can set up what's called a field of interest fund here. Again, that's a permanent endowed fund. It would be a named fund for that person. But again, the grant making from that would be at the discretion of our staff, but it would be for requests within the environmental sort, right? So Piedmont Environmental Alliance comes with a grant that we would use dollars from these environmental field of interest funds to respond to those grant requests. And then we have things like designated funds. So that's sort of the next step in specificity. So maybe an organization or a donor comes to us and says, I want to set up a permanent fund that's going to benefit this organization. I really have a strong tie to Second Harvest Food Bank. I want to make sure that every year Second Harvest Food Bank is getting support from my charitable fund. So we could set up a permanent endowed fund that is designated for Second Harvest Food Bank. So every year for the rest of time from that fund, Second Harvest will get a check.
Yep.
And then we have what we've talked to about donor advised funds, right? So a donor advised fund would be somebody comes, sets up a fund here at the foundation, and then can make grant recommendations from that fund in real time. So it doesn't have to be for the same organization every year. This month, I want to send a check to my church. The next month, I want to send a check to the YMCA. The next month, I want to send a check to Big Brothers Big Sisters. The next year, I want to send a check to my alma mater. It's really more sort of real time.
And I feel like donor advised funds are becoming more popular. There's a lot more interest in them, especially as people are doing large Roth conversions. It's a way of offsetting some of those taxes. And then you're not necessarily giving up that control, but you're allocating that money towards charity. So you're getting that deduction, but you haven't kind of turned it all loose yet. I've got multiple clients who like to give, and they tie to their church regularly. And they say, even though I've been going to church here for a long time, well, there's nothing to say that they might not have a new pastor in a year, and that church changes. And it's like, I don't want to front end load giving for 5 years, but the donor advised fund allows you to get that tax benefit while not turning loose those dollars until at your discretion, right? And now I think the one restriction with donor advised funds is it has to go to a Fund C3.
That's right.
So you can't just say my kids are my charity, right?
That's exactly right. So there are restrictions that the IRS puts on what you can direct grants to from your donor advised fund. It does have to be a qualified 503 nonprofit organization. You can make a grant to a scholarship program, but you can't make a grant to say, I want to pay John Smith's tuition. So you can't be for an individual, and you also can't receive sort of some tangible benefits. But I will just mention that's one of the great things about having a donor advised fund with the Winston-Salem Foundation is we will do that due diligence for you.
Okay.
So if you make a grant request for something and we see actually that organization's not a nonprofit, we will flag that and correct it with you. So we kind of do all that back end due diligence.
Cool question. So what about somebody who, let's say they want to give to their church, they're going to tie it to their church, and the church has a missionary that comes in and speaks, and it's like, I want to allocate this to that missionary. Is that different than a scholarship, or are they still going to run in the same issue?
Yeah, that's a complex one. My understanding on that is you can direct it to if it's a program,
like a mission.
Yeah, if they sort of have a fund that benefits missionaries, you can do that, but you couldn't say it is for this person. It's for the program that supports that person. Right. Makes sense. So that's probably one of the trickier little nuances of that.
Are there other things like that have come up where people kind of go, oh, I wish I'd known that beforehand, and not in a bad way, just in a clarity or an FYI perspective?
The other thing that I see a lot of people coming to the foundation, they want to set up a donor advised fund because it's time for them to start taking their RMDs.
Right.
Unfortunately, the IRS at this point is saying that a donor advised fund cannot accept a qualified charitable distribution.
Correct.
So if you're setting up a donor advised fund, you can't direct your QCD to that donor advised fund. You could, but you'd have to claim the income. So with the QCDs, now other types of funds at the Winston-Salem Foundation, if you had a scholarship fund set up or a designated fund, you could direct your QCD to those. But the IRS right now is saying you can't direct those to a donor advised fund. So it's the one thing I do just kind of, especially when I'm talking to people in that age bracket, I want to make sure that that's not what they're setting this.
I think that's a really salient point. And the reason I like you mentioning that is because personally, I found that when we're talking to clients about this, I really like non-qualified funds, especially appreciated stocks going into the donor advised fund, because a lot of people don't realize you don't have to pay those capital gains if you gift those appreciated stocks. So what I love to do is take folks that have, say, a 401k and you own company stock, publicly traded stock. You've been holding on to it for a long time. You got this big capital gain inside of there. Do an NUA out of it. So you only pay income on the cost basis, and then you take that appreciated stock, gift that into the donor advised fund, and then you don't pay the income taxes on the lion's share of it, and you don't pay the capital gains taxes on it, and you're really able to maximize that giving. And so you take it what could be a 30-40% reduction just due to taxes, and all of that is then allocated, whether it's from a church standpoint, kingdom building, whether it's community building. I love to see those dollars, kind of to your earlier point. There's really three places it's going to go. If we can reduce what goes to the government legally, compliantly, I'm all for that. Do you mind sharing maybe a little bit about the difference between reactive giving and intentional giving?
Yeah, I think, I mentioned this earlier, different donors or different individuals, whether they're client donors or just members of the community, are kind of are on different points in their charitable giving path, right? So I find a lot of times you get introduced to charitable giving by somebody asks you for a gift. It might be a Boy Scout knocking on your door and they want you to support their troop. And so you give them $25 check.
Yeah.
That's really kind of a reactive gift. Okay, I was asked and sure.
It falls in your lap. Yep. You say, round up for, give the 82 cents to the Humane Society. Just round me up to the next dollar. That's the reactionary side.
And that's a great way to get introduced to charitable giving. Okay. But then I find that as people sort of progress and get an understanding of different organizations and what those organizations do, the charitable giving really becomes a way to connect with the mission of those organizations. And they want to make an impact for that specific cause or that specific organization's mission. Then their giving sort of moves from being just reactive, I was asked, so I give, to I want to make an impact with my dollars. Which organization is going to help me do that? What charitable giving tool is going to help me do that? Am I going to do that now? Does it make sense to do it for my stage of life now? Or is this something that I'm going to plan for at the time of my death and leave a legacy? So it just becomes a little bit more strategic, but I think it also becomes quite a bit more meaningful as well.
Right. So something that I heard John Maxwell say, I've had the opportunity to hear him speak several times and talk with him. And something that he said was, do your giving while you're living so you're knowing where it's going. I think there's something fantastic about is like when I give you a gift, and then I see how you utilize those funds, whether it's funds, whether it's a car or anything else, you can really kind of decide, okay, this is somebody who I want to give more to, or this is an organization that I want to support and continue. Or you look at it and you go, wow, that was not how I thought that was going to be utilized. So kind of with that in mind, I know there's different concepts of giving strategies. How do you approach it when folks say, okay, I don't want to give a ton now, but I really want to get a good understanding of where this is going? And how do you reconcile kind of those two pieces?
I think donor advised funds are a great sort of tool for that, because again, it allows you that flexibility of saying, okay, I'm gonna send $500 to this organization, maybe see how I'm stewarded, see, get introduced to that organization a little more, and then maybe I want to pivot to this organization and things like that. Kind of starting with that introductory donor advised fund. And, at the Winston-Salem Foundation, you can start a donor advised fund with as little as $1,000. Okay. So, wow. I mean, it's very low bar to kind of get involved in charitable giving. Also, if you have a donor advised fund here at the Winston-Salem Foundation, you're going to be invited to some events that introduce you to different charitable giving or charitable organizations in the community. We call these our donor connect events, where we'll have an event around, for instance, affordable housing, and we'll bring in different organizations that are working in that space, or around food insecurity, and we'll bring in organizations so you can sort of meet some of the leadership of those organizations, which I think gives you a real good perspective on how those organizations operate, hear what their mission and what their goals are and how they achieve that. The other thing I'll say in terms of the leaving the legacy, kind of long term and after your death, and to kind of respond to Mr. Maxwell's point there, that is another benefit of setting up a charitable plan with a community foundation, because again, we have been here for 100 years. We plan to be here for another 100 years. And so we take donor intent very seriously when we outline legacy plans for a charitable fund here at the foundation. Right. So when we work with the donor, we have them outline what they want those dollars to be used for. And then even 20 years after they're passed, when those checks are going to that organization, we ask that organization to report back as to how those dollars were used, to make sure that that's matching up. And if it is, great. And if it's not, we'll either work with that organization to make sure that that's righted, or we'll find an organization that's doing that work. Maybe that organization has gone out of business or something like that. We can, again, sort of do that due diligence and align the donor's intent forever as that fund continues to grow.
One thing that I hope people take away from this conversation that I really appreciate that you shared with is there's more than just one way to do it, right? It was like, and we see that with investments a lot. Oftentimes people approach investing and they kind of go, okay, my options are I can put it in stocks, I can put it in bonds, or maybe I can put it into an insurance product, and that's it. And the reality is there's all kinds of alternative funds, there's non-correlated funds, there's ways to invest in private equity, there's ways to invest in sports franchises and things of that nature. And I feel like the more you start to understand and realize, well, there's more than one way to do this. So what I love to do when I'm sitting down with clients is I really like to start with what's their goals. What are we trying to accomplish? And you almost think about it like a giant whiteboard, and you've got all of these things on there. And as we talk, I kind of go, okay, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And before you know it, you winnow it down to what does make sense. But you lead off with all things on the table. And it seems like, if I'm hearing you correctly, the way the Winston-Salem Foundation does it is they say, we can do a whole lot of things. If you only want to give charity in this aspect of the community, that's great. Well, here's what's still available, and you can kind of help narrow it down. But sometimes having a guided conversation and helping you uncover kind of what is your goal, what are you trying to accomplish, because it can be hard when you think through, and especially when it's not your area of focus. Right. Whether we're talking about finances, whether we're talking about charitable giving, whether we're talking about anything else, it can be a little bit overwhelming to kind of think through. So I appreciate that you're willing to sit down with different donors and help them kind of narrow that scope.
And we do, and most of our donors come to us, our new donors mostly come to us because they've worked with a professional advisor, whether it's their financial advisor or their estate planning attorney or their CPA, that says, there's a charitable portion that I know you want to do here, and you should go talk to the Winston-Salem Foundation because they can really help outline that. So we really value those relationships. But to your point, like, many people come to us maybe sort of thinking they want a donor advised fund or thinking they want to do a scholarship fund because maybe that's just what they're most familiar with. And then after we have some conversations, that may still be the case, or maybe we've got more specific or a little bit less specific. For instance, we recently had a woman come to us. She recently had a significant income event. She sold some property that will have some impact down with taxes this year. So she wanted to set up a donor advised fund here at the foundation, and that makes sense. She's still got many years of charity. She's very active in her giving. She can bundle many years of giving into a donor advised fund to get that tax benefit this year as a response to that income event. But this is an endowed fund that she's setting up. So it's a permanent fund here. It'll be invested. It'll grow. She doesn't have any heirs. So what we were able to outline in this fund agreement was that once she passes, this fund will then become a designated fund that benefits an organization that she really cares about. So it will again be continuing her giving to that organization long after she's passed. Others come to us and they say, I'm giving right now to these organizations, but I also want to set up my legacy through my estate plans. And we talk about those field of interest funds where it's like, I think I like this organization right now, but am I sure that it's going to be around in 50 years and that it's going to be the best organization doing that work? Maybe there's another organization that doesn't even exist yet that's going to be doing great work in that area. So those field of interest funds can really be a great way for your legacy planning in allowing the Winston-Salem Foundation to sort of keep up with what work is being done in the community and making the impact that you want.
So it sounds like this is really more partnership based, where it's really around helping you kind of dial in on what do we want to do. And I really like that field of interest fund approach, particularly because things do change. Things have a way of evolving. I know you go to a coffee shop and you're like, okay, this place has been great. And then they get new ownership and you go, this isn't quite as good as it used to be, or this is way better. They're expanding, but they've kind of lost their way in certain areas. So let me ask you this. Are there any trends that you've noticed over time? Because when it comes to investing, you'll see certain things get really popular, certain trends get really popular. Things like cryptocurrency. All of a sudden, everyone's talking about cryptocurrency, and you go, wait a minute, I thought you didn't know how to turn on your computer, and yet you're asking me about cryptocurrency at Thanksgiving. And you have other things that get really popular during different time periods. Right now, AI. Everyone's talking about AI and the impact of AI. And so those, whether it's direct stocks, whether it's investing, kind of the direction it's going in, the different tools that are coming out. Have you noticed kind of trends or certain themes that emerge from a charitable giving perspective that maybe 20 years ago, everyone was doing it this way? That's not really the best way to do it now. And kind of where do you see it heading kind of forward looking, I guess would be the key thing here.
Well, certainly donor advised funds are very popular these days. Rightly so. I think it's a really good charitable giving tool. Again, the setup of them are very easy. It's very approachable way to do your charitable giving. When you sort of look about generationally, so there's a large transfer of wealth that's coming, probably has started. And this next generation kind of has some different motivations for their giving. They want to be involved with the organizations that they support in different ways. I think with, with maybe a past generation, they would sort of cut the check and move on. And this new generation maybe wants to be a little bit more involved. And so for those nonprofit organizations, sort of thinking about how am I engaging with these donors? How am I stewarding them? What are some ways that we can sort of work with them on how they want to see an impact? That being said, I do encourage donors to keep in mind the general support of these nonprofit organizations is really important. A lot of times donors, they really want to, hey, I'm going to send you a check and I want you to use it for this program, for this very specific thing. Okay. And that's okay. And that's I'm glad that program is really meaningful to you. But these nonprofit organizations really do need to keep the lights on. And so charitable dollars for general support is really important for these organizations. So, but just to kind of circle back on your question, I think just the way that this younger generation is looking to be involved, I think that's part of the reason that the donor advised fund has become really popular because, again, it's flexible.
And you do maintain that sense of control.
That's right.
This is going to sound silly, but something that we do at our staff is we take half the staff and we go off and we do volunteering days, right? And so we have some folks that are covering office, we have some folks that are out of office, and so a couple weeks ago, I took a number of our staff members and we were working with Habitat for Humanity and we were building a house.
Yeah, great.
Right, and it was a wonderful experience. And something that I am not a construction guy. I admire people that are. I love getting in there and getting my hands dirty and doing what I can. But when I was talking with them, it was like, there's those special flat pencils that you use for construction.
Yeah.
Okay. I was looking at it and I was like, holy smokes, you go through so many of these. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that if I'm allocating the dollars and I say, okay, you need to buy a new miter saw. They're like, well, we don't need another miter saw. We actually need pencils.
Right.
If you would just put it in the general fund, we can buy the thing we actually need. We have plenty of hammers, but we don't have this.
And I think as donors get more familiar with the organizations that they're engaging with, that trust grows. And so over time, I do see a lot of times, especially in maybe some of those long-term legacy plans, it is, I want to support this organization and it's for general support. I know that they're going to do great work with it.
Yeah. Well, I love investments also that have a positive impact. And so when you look at whether it's non-correlated funds, whether it's stocks that have a mission you believe in, whether it's, charitable giving in different ways, I think there's ways to grow your funds to create a greater impact. Yeah. It's like, and when you have good stewardship of what you have, it can have a huge impact. So if somebody wants to learn a little bit more about your organization and how you guys are impacting the triad, where would they go to? Who would they talk to?
Yeah. So certainly you could look at our website. We've got a lot of great information on the website, whether you're a prospective donor or whether you're a professional advisor. We have different sections on our website to see the different types of funds and how you would start those. In my role as Senior Philanthropic Advisor, I work with new folks that are coming to the foundation on talking about what they want to do. And so I'm certainly always happy to sit down with folks and have that conversation about where they want to.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to step in and do this. And Phil, it's been an absolute pleasure. Best of luck. And I'm sure we'll be following up with more conversations. And I really appreciate what you guys do and the impact you have in the community. And if you have any questions and you want to follow up with our office, we'll get you in contact with Phil and his team. Hope you have a wonderful day. Thanks for listening. And on behalf of everyone at Semmax, have a beautiful day.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Semmax Way. If you're not completely satisfied with your current financial advisor, give us a call for a second opinion. Please note that this podcast is intended for informational and entertainment purposes only. The content shared on the Semmax Way should not be considered as investment advice. It is always recommended consult your licensed investment representative and a competent tax advisor respectively for your fiduciary needs and plans. No statement contained in the Semmax Way podcast or made by its producers, sponsors, host Matt Landon, or Semmax Financial Group is a recommendation. Semmax Financial Group and Matt Landon are not responsible or liable for investment value loss of any kind from any action taken based on information discussed in the Semmax Way podcast. Any opinions or viewpoints in this podcast are shared for information and entertainment purposes only and are not financial advice. We do encourage you to conduct further research and seek personalized advice for your specific financial circumstances. Full disclosure available at semmax.com/podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you tune in for future episodes of the Semmax Way.